welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of an absolutely wild ride of a book. It blends historical fiction with horror elements. There is so much going on, so many fascinating twists and turns set in a fascinating period of history in time and place. And I'm so excited for this conversation. Welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yes, hi, my name is Kristen Loesch, and I am the author of The Hong Kong Widow.
Could you tell us a little bit about your journey as a writer and perhaps your other works?
Sure. My journey goes back quite a bit because I always wanted to be a writer from when I was a young kid. And I was an avid reader, which I think is often the origin story of writers. I loved libraries. And I sort of let myself be talked out of that dream for quite a while, as I think also often happens through high school and college. I wanted to become an academic, and I pursued that dream for a while. And then I took a step back from that because I realized it wasn't for me. I had kids. My kids were very young, and I started to think, okay, I need to think about what I'm going to do when my kids, as my kids grow up, I get a little bit more time. And I thought of writing it again. I thought, okay, I'm gonna give this a try. It was very nerve-wracking, and my first attempt got me absolutely nowhere. So it was a YA contemporary novel, and it was not fit for publication in any sense. So it's for the best that that didn't work out. But I became more determined. So I wrote another novel, and that eventually, after many drafts, became my debut novel, The Last Russian Doll, which came out in March 2023 in the US. And since then, I've written again via many drafts and many detours, The Hong Kong Widow, my second, which will be out here in October.
Nice. And that story resonates with me as somebody who also tried to be an academic and is now outside of
Same.
academia. So that's great. I am curious about what your history training was in. I know one of your degrees is in Slavic studies. How did your time in academia, did it influence your writing process or your approach to fiction at all?
That's a great question. I would say that it was both beneficial and detrimental. So it gave me a sort of false confidence about my ability to write because you do a lot of writing as an academic, as I'm sure you know, and you do a lot of research, which is great for historical fiction. And research is probably one of my favorite parts of the process. And I do love that sort of period of discovery when you're immersing yourself in a different time and place via other people's words mostly and other people's writing. But I think also academic writing is so different because you're often trying to, I don't want to say pay lip service, but you really have to keep in mind, bear in mind, everything that sort of came before you in your area. And you want to make sure that you're aware of it. You want to make sure your audience is aware that you are aware of it. There are these sort of expectations around, you're kind of building on research that has come before. You're not necessarily striking out, into something new until the very end stage of your academic career. And so while in terms of research and reading and maintaining discipline, I would say that was great for me, but it definitely I had to rethink my style and my approach a lot. And I was very humbled by that process for sure.
As you were talking, it occurred to me that two big differences are, one in academic writing, you know, it doesn't have twists and turns. It follows a
Mm,
structure. You're never writing to hide something, which you sometimes have to do, like in a sort of suspense or thrillery story. Yeah, and there's just a lot of different conventions, and
yes.
it's a very interesting thing to think about. So, what did your research look like for this project? it takes place across three timelines, but a lot of the action is in 1950s Hong Kong. Could you talk about what sort of research you did and how you went about bringing that to life on the page?
Sure. So I'll contrast it a little bit with how it was for my debut novel, because as you mentioned, I did a degree in Slavonic studies. So I was coming from a place of, again, perhaps false confidence, as it turned out. But I felt like I had some basic knowledge of, the major historical events, the political landscape. Whereas for this project, it was very different. I was coming at it from a very different angle. So I am half Chinese. And so I've been, I'm very, very close to my mom's side of the family. My mom is Chinese, Taiwanese. And I'd grown up in that culture with that language, but without any sort of academic knowledge of, the time and place in which my grandparents grew up, a lot of which inspired the Hong Kong Widow. And so I had a very different kind of knowledge base to draw from. And ultimately, as with The Last Russian Doll, it was not enough. And I needed a combination of both. Okay, I need the sort of the feel of intimacy and authenticity that I'm getting from drawing on my family history, but I also need a broader picture. And I need to look to other sources and outside sources and make sure that I'm not so hung up on trying to be true to what I already know that I forget to broaden my own horizons here. So I read a lot of memoirs. I would say that memoirs are probably my go-to resource. There are a lot of translated memoirs. I cannot read Mandarin, sadly. And they were an amazing resource, really, really, really valuable. And I've always thought that, historical textbooks are of slightly less use when you're writing historical fiction because they give a really, they can give a really great bird's eye view of the political landscape or of sort of the larger forces at work in society, but they really don't give you any picture of what it's like to be a person in that society, an everyday citizen waking up, what sort of shoes do you put on? What do you eat for breakfast? How do you get to school? My mother went to school on a water buffalo. Which is a detail I always loved. But you might not get that from reading a textbook about Taiwan in the 1960s. So I think getting those details, those sort of everyday, often incredibly mundane seeming details about people's everyday lives are actually what elevates the work and what helps to bring it to life in the end.
Mm, That's a great point. And I think related to that is that, the textbooks give you sort of the events of great men, quote unquote, with
Oh, yes.
emphasis on the men
Hmm.
and often obscure what life was like for women in this period. And for
Definitely.
something like, a time of upheaval like this, but the occupation, the Pacific War having, just happened and the Communist Revolution happening, the book really brings to life like how times of upheaval affect women as opposed to men. So let's use that to begin talking about May, who is your protagonist. We encounter her over a broad swath of her life, and she's absolutely fascinating. So can you talk about shaping her as a character?
Yes, I would love to. I'm very, very attached to May. She is, as you say, the character who narrates the entire book, albeit, in different versions of her, so her at different ages. And I first sort of, I don't know what the right word is, encountered her, thought of her. She first came alive to me on the page when I was writing a flash fiction story that is only 200 words long. The finished story is only 200 words, and it's online at the online journal Flash Fiction, flashbackfiction.com, I think it's called. And I was writing a lot of short fiction at the time and thinking a little bit about what my second novel was going to be about. I had some ideas. I hadn't decided on anything, and I was doing a little bit of research into Hong Kong because I lived for a year in Hong Kong, and I came across some interesting details, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna start out just writing a flash fiction story and just sort of dip a toe in. And so I wrote this 200 word story. And in it, the character is called May, and she kind of swims the distance between the mainland China, and she arrives in Hong Kong. Although I don't think I specified what year she was doing this, but she arrives in Hong Kong, and then she's there, and it's tough, and that's it because it's 200 words. So that's the whole story. And that story, I could tell that there was something there. And I really wanted to know more about what was going on with her. So I ended up translating that story into Mandarin for the website. And I started thinking, maybe the reason that I feel compelled to translate it is because if May were writing this story, it would be in Mandarin. It would be in her native language. I thought, whoa, I'm really thinking of her as a real person, which does often happen, which is both great and sometimes a pitfall. And I started wondering, well, what would her backstory have been? Where would she have come from? What is she going to do when she arrives in Hong Kong? What is the rest of her life looking like? And I decided that she was going to become the star of my next novel and that I was going to marry this with my sort of broader, vaguer, larger idea of bringing my family history into a novel, specifically my grandfather's early life in northern China. And I had the idea that I would sort of make Shanghai and Hong Kong the two places, the two focal points of this book geographically. And I was thinking sort of like two cities, like a tale of two cities. I don't know. I had all these ambitious ideas at the outset. And I think that was where I started thinking about, okay, well, what is the story going to look like? All I know from the beginning is that May is going to be the star of it, hopefully the superstar, because I became so attached to her.
That's so interesting. And I'm very curious about how all that starts to come into play with the horror elements, let's say. And I will keep it broad here to sort of let you, decide what we reveal, where we go. I love historical horror.
Me too.
Um, I love horror as a lens to like learn about a society in place and time because I think something that I've said here before in this podcast is that like fear is universal, but horror is culturally specific and historically specific sometimes, I think, so I think that's something that makes May's journey so great, that like her situation and her horror is so rooted in time and place, but her fears are universal and that you can immediately sort of latch onto that and experience what she's experiencing with her, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it, actually. I love that. And I adore historical horror. I think it's just a fantastic genre and one that is, I hope, sort of taking off a bit more than this sort of as far as genre blends go, I think historical horror is hopefully having a moment. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah, me too. Um, I'd love to talk about, let's keep it to sort of, the some early scenes. I'd love if we could
Sure.
be in the talk a little bit about the seance, the incident as it is. We can reveal as little or as much as you want, but I'd love to know specifically if you did research into mediumship, I guess if you want to call it at this time. What sort of research and preparation went into writing those scenes? And yeah, what did you learn about the spiritualism, I guess, of the time?
That is a great question also. I wanted to incorporate a lot of the tradition and folklore, but I also wanted to make sure that I was sort of making the horror my own, if that makes sense. Because I knew that there was so much to draw from, and it's so amazing to draw from all of that, to just to have this body of belief and superstition, Chinese culture, Chinese ghost lore, there is so much there. There are so many different types of ghosts. Most of them are based on how the person died. So if you have a certain type of death, you often turn into a certain type of ghost. And there is just, I mean, you could talk about academia. I mean, you could write so many papers looking into this. And and I think, I did go down several rabbit holes, especially regarding how spirit mediums worked at the time. So, they did a lot of spirit writing, especially at that time that when May is growing up. So it would be sort of like a kind of traditional, I guess, what we think of as a seance. People would be gathered around the medium, but it would almost always be with a spirit pen, that was sort of their preferred way of doing it. There were also a lot of medium sessions where people would be possessed by ghosts in front of the audience. So there, you set the medium sort of sets the scene with candles and sort of certain set of decorations and make it sort of festive looking, and they would literally just sort of lean back go quiet and everyone's kind of watching, and then be possessed by whomever it is that they're, hoping to contact, and speak in a different voice, or even start dancing, or, just behave however, the spirit wants them to behave, and then come out of the trance and have no idea what they had just done. So there's a lot of research that you can do into that as well. And I drew from that, and I sort of wanted to have certain reference points to that, but I also wanted to do something a bit different. So a lot of stuff that happens in the book is my own invention in terms of how things are working, how the seances are progressing, what is possible and what isn't. Of course, with horror, you always have to be careful to establish the rules of the world, so it doesn't become a situation where it's like, oh, anything can happen, because, where everything is possible, then it sort of loses something. I think we all know how that feels in a novel. So that was very important to me, but I also wanted to make sure that I wasn't just using stuff that I had read or researched. I wanted it to be a system that was unique to my book.
Mm. Yeah, rules are annoying, but they're also useful because the rules of reality like help establish your stakes, right? Like, because if
For
anything
sure.
can happen, there are no like interesting stakes.
Exactly.
Um, and I love using folklore and research as a basis to sort of go off and do your own thing because the folklore especially can give you expectations that you can play with that you can either like fulfill or subvert,
Mm,
for readers coming with various levels of familiarity. It's just such an interesting way to encounter a place in time, like through horror rooted, like in what was going on in society and in politics at the time. It's just a fascinating read. And the combination of like, you know, thorough research with like very evocative writing and great character work. Oh, that's my last question is about, encountering May over her
mm,
lifespan. Um, so we see her over many decades. We learn about her childhood and then we see her in her later years as she's returning to confront her past. What is it like to write a character over such a long time frame? Because in some ways, like you're writing a few different people, right? Like we are different people at all these different stages of our life, but there has to sort of be a thread of continuity so that they remain recognizable. So how do you approach that?
yeah, so that was a really, really interesting process that was not without its major challenges. And so I liked to think of it as I had three different versions of May. And I thought of the young May as a child as May version one. And May version one is, she's growing up in a, objectively kind of horrific situation politically and from a larger perspective. And she's also going through a lot of personal things that are very difficult. We know that she starts looking for her mother, and this is an overwhelming quest for her. But she's also got a lot of innocence and a lot of joy and a lot of humor and a very childish way of seeing the world that I really wanted to capture. And I felt like she is a May who isn't living yet with a lot of pain. She's still very innocent. And then May version two, the May that comes after in 1950s Hong Kong, who is sort of in a way that, the star of the blurb of the novel. So she's the one who has to enter the seance, the competition. She's the one who has to go into the haunted house. And that's when we get a lot of the supernatural stuff, the spooky stuff, the revenge plot. And I thought, okay, this is May, who is in a lot of pain, who is almost nothing but pain in a way. She's almost like a human version of a vengeful spirit. She's kind of driven by this need for revenge without even knowing what that revenge is ultimately going to do for her, and living this shell of a life in the meantime. And then I thought of, okay, May version three is sort of a combination of those two. So she's been through pain, she's been through loss, but she's also, come out of it. So she's not stuck in it the way May version two is, but she's not innocent the way May version one is. She is a combination of both. But at the same time, what the problem with her, or rather the challenge that she faces, is that she has almost moved on too far. So she thinks that the past has no value anymore, that it's all about sort of moving on and looking forward and forgetting what happened. And part of her arc is, I think, learning that the past has value, even though it was painful. And so writing these three perspectives was an incredible experience for me. I absolutely loved it. And when readers, I've read reviews and I've heard from readers by now saying how much they loved May. That means everything to me as the writer. That is one of the highest possible sort of forms of praise or elements of praise that I could receive about the book. So thank you so much for that question.
Oh, great. Yes, I'm so glad I asked it because she is an absolutely wonderful character, and she is all the Mays are such fascinating lenses on their societies and on what is happening to them. They're remarkable witnesses to the events of the book. Yeah, thank you for sharing the book with me. What is next for you? What's on your horizon right now?
So I am writing a book three, but I cannot give details about that yet. But yes, eventually, exciting news to come.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Godspeed in your writing.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, I can't wait to tell our patrons about this book.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jen. It was a pleasure.
Thanks. All right, listeners, it's your turn now. Please check out The Hong Kong Widow, an absolutely gorgeous read. I think you'll really enjoy it. We're heading into the holiday season and not too long a time, so this is going to be great for the horror lovers in your life and the history lovers. Please check it out at your favorite bookstore or maybe library, website, wherever you like to go for books. Do you have a place that you like to send people for books? Do you have a favorite bookstore?
Well, in my hometown back in the US, in Redmond, there is a bookstore called Bricks and Mortar Books in Redmond, and I love that bookstore. If anyone is in the Seattle area, they should definitely go there. But yes, any bookstore is wonderful. Any library is wonderful. I'm so grateful for all of my readers.
Excellent. All right, so you have your assignment, listeners. We will see you next time. It is time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.